There's a reason why the pyramids still stand. Not just as stone marvels, but as coded messages, monuments carved with intent, aligned to the stars, whispering secrets that modern minds no longer hear. You see, to the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't the end. It was a return to the source, a journey through realms both terrifying and sublime, an initiation. But what if I told you that their view of the afterlife was more than myth, that it was a blueprint, a metaphysical map, not only for what happens after we die, but for how we're meant to live? We moderns scoff at the notion of souls weighed on golden scales. We reduce the Book of the Dead to funeral magic or mere poetry. Yet we forget, these were not fairy tales. They were precise teachings wrapped in symbol, designed to train the soul. Somewhere between science and dogma, between empires and institutions, we lost the truth. And here's the unsettling part. The Egyptians believed that forgetting this truth was the greatest danger of all. In this video, we'll descend into that forgotten wisdom. We'll uncover what the ancient Egyptians actually believed about the afterlife. Not just the surface symbols, but the profound metaphysical system beneath it all. We'll explore why the journey beyond death was central to their civilization, why they saw the soul's purification as a cosmic necessity, and how these ancient teachings still hold transformative power for those willing to remember. This isn't about mythology. It's about memory. It's about initiation. Because perhaps what they called the afterlife was never about what happens after death, but what happens when we truly awaken. Let's begin. To understand what the ancient Egyptians truly knew about the afterlife, we must first step outside the lens of modern thinking. In their world, death wasn't an end to be feared. It was a rite of passage, a sacred return to the divine origin of the soul. They called their land Kemet, the Black Land, not just because of the fertile soil of the Nile, but because they believed in the alchemical principle of transformation. Darkness, to them, was not evil. It was the womb of rebirth. It was from this philosophy that their concept of the afterlife emerged, not as a final destination, but as an initiatory process. Central to this belief was the idea of Ma'at, the cosmic order, the divine balance of truth, justice, and harmony. In life, one was meant to align with Ma'at. In death, one would be judged by it. But this judgment wasn't punitive, it was diagnostic. The famous scene of the weighing of the heart was not about sin and punishment. It was about resonance. The heart, the seat of consciousness, was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If it was too heavy, with regret, dishonesty, or unresolved pain, it could not pass. Not because a god was angry, but because the soul was not yet attuned to truth. This journey beyond death was detailed in what modern scholars call the Book of the Dead, though the Egyptians never used that title. They called it the Book of Coming Forth by Day, a guidebook for the soul's journey through the underworld, Duat, and into the light of eternal consciousness. It's crucial to understand, these texts weren't just religious. They were initiatory manuals, esoteric scrolls coded in metaphor, describing not only the journey of the soul after death, but the inner transformation required in life to complete it. They believed life itself was a sacred preparation. Every thought, every action, every word was an energetic imprint. These imprints either harmonized or disrupted the soul's resonance with Ma'at. In other words, we're not judged later, we're shaping our afterlife now, moment by moment. But over millennia, this knowledge was buried. The rise of conquest and orthodoxy rebranded these teachings as pagan superstition. The esoteric schools were dissolved, the symbols misinterpreted. The feather became a fairy tale. The gods were reduced to cartoons. And the afterlife, a realm once seen as a mirror of the inner world, was distorted into a simplistic binary of reward and punishment. But the deeper meaning never truly disappeared. It hid in plain sight, encoded in temples, preserved in glyphs, whispered through symbols. The soul's journey through Duat, through rivers of fire, gates of trial, and encounters with archetypal beings, was not just a map for what happens after death. It was a metaphor for the human psyche, for confronting the shadow, for integrating the fragmented self, for awakening the divine within. In essence, what the Egyptians left us was not a religion, but a technology of consciousness, a sacred science of the soul. And while modern society has traded the sacred for the scientific and mystery for materialism, that technology still waits for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. So what exactly did this initiatory journey through the afterlife look like? Let's now venture deeper into the heart of Egyptian wisdom, into the symbolic underworld where the soul remembers who it truly is. Imagine this: you die, not in pain, not in fear, but with the awareness that you are crossing a threshold. A veil parts. You are weightless, aware, conscious. You remember. This is how the ancient Egyptians envisioned the soul's journey beyond death, not as a chaotic plunge into the unknown, but as a structured passage, a sacred initiation through the Duat, the underworld. But this underworld was not hell. It was a realm of tests, symbols, and reflection, a mirror of your inner world projected into form. The journey began at the threshold of the west, the direction of the setting sun, the gateway to the unseen. Here, the soul was greeted not with fire and brimstone, but with questions, challenges, guardians of gates, each one asking not, "Did you believe?" but "Did you know yourself?" You see, in Egyptian thought, the afterlife was not about judgment from above, but the confrontation of your own essence. It was not enough to live a quiet life, you had to live a conscious one. The soul had to pass through a series of symbolic gates, each representing a different aspect of the self. Anger, greed, deception, regret, denial. These were not external demons. They were personified fragments of the soul's unresolved lessons, archetypes you had to face, name, and transmute. Only in doing so could the soul proceed. And guiding this journey were beings known not just as gods, but as Neteru, forces of nature, principles of cosmic intelligence. Osiris, the Lord of the Dead, was not simply a king on a throne. He was the embodiment of renewal, the inner self that must die to the old and rise anew. Anubis, the jackal-headed guide, was not a grim reaper, but a psychopomp, a soul guide who led you through liminality with precision. Each encounter in the Duat had meaning. Serpents guarded gates, not as monsters, but as symbols of transformation. Fire was not punishment, it was purification. The entire process was alchemical. But here's what most miss: this journey was not reserved for death alone. Initiates in the mystery schools of ancient Egypt practiced simulated journeys through the Duat while still alive. Through rituals, altered states, and sacred architecture, they prepared the soul to navigate this realm consciously. The temples were not just places of worship, they were maps. Initiation chambers mirrored the trials of the afterlife. The walls themselves whispered instructions. The Temple of Seti at Abydos, the Osirian, the Hall of Records, these places weren't built for tourists or tombs. They were energetic portals, places where the veil was thin. Even the Great Pyramid, once called the House of Ascension, was not a burial chamber. It was a resonance chamber, aligned with celestial cycles, designed to assist the soul in navigating between worlds. So what does this all mean? It means the Egyptians didn't wait to die to explore the afterlife. They trained for it. They practiced it. They lived it. And in doing so, they discovered something radical: that the afterlife was not a place. It was a state of consciousness. To them, the real question wasn't, what happens when we die? But rather, are you awake enough to recognize the journey when it begins? Because the true purpose of the afterlife teachings was not to prepare for some distant event. It was to awaken you now, to cleanse the soul of distortion, to strip away the illusions, to face the fragmented self, to remember who and what you truly are. In this way, death was never feared. It was revered. Because for the ancient Egyptians, death was not the opposite of life. It was the continuation of it, on a higher octave, in a more refined frequency. A return to source, through the fires of truth. And this was only the beginning. Beyond the final gate of the Duat lies one of the most profound scenes in Egyptian spiritual literature: the weighing of the heart. This was not some primitive judgment ritual. It was a symbolic initiation where the heart, the core of one's consciousness, was placed on a scale opposite the feather of Ma'at, the principle of truth and divine order. If the heart was heavier, the soul was not destroyed out of wrath or vengeance. It simply could not ascend. It was not attuned to the higher vibrational reality of truth. To the Egyptians, the heart retained memory, not just of actions, but of intentions, of integrity, of what one became through life's trials. There was no external savior, no last-minute confessions, only alignment or misalignment with the truth you had lived. But what happens when the soul passes this test? It enters the Aru, the field of reeds, a luminous mirror of earthly life, but purified. Here, the soul is not in paradise in the way we think of heaven. It is in balance, a perfected reflection of the inner self, still individual, still conscious, but free from distortion. The soul becomes Ak, an enlightened, luminous being, merged with the stars, yet still uniquely itself. This is where the most misunderstood secret lies. The field of reeds was not a reward. It was the realization of potential, a state of being accessible not just after death, but through deep inner work in life. In essence, the ancient Egyptians weren't just speaking of the geography of the afterlife. They were describing states of consciousness, levels of awareness, inner alchemy. They believed that the soul was composed of multiple parts, Ka, Ba, Ak, Run, Shut, each with its own role. The Ba was the personality, the part that traveled between realms. The Ka was the life force, the divine double. The Run was the true name, the eternal identity. The Shut, or shadow, represented the unconscious. And the Ak, the luminous, transfigured spirit, was the goal of the journey. To reach Ak was to return to the divine in full awareness, to shine among the imperishable stars. But in order to become Ak, the soul had to become whole. Every scar faced, every shadow named, every distortion burned away, not by fire, but by truth. This was the purification process the underworld demanded. This is where modern understanding falters. We've reduced these rich metaphysical teachings to a caricature. Gods with animal heads, spells to ward off demons. But what they were truly describing was initiation through self-confrontation. A mirror held to the soul, a guide to transcendence. Even the gods themselves weren't external beings in the way we often interpret them. They were personifications of natural laws, cosmic principles, forces within consciousness. Isis was not just a goddess of magic. She was the embodiment of divine memory, the healer who pieces together the fragmented self. Thoth was not merely a scribe. He represented divine intelligence, the sacred word, the logos. These were archetypes, living symbols designed to awaken dormant truths in the initiate. And perhaps the most profound realization is this: the journey through the afterlife is not linear. It is cyclical. Just as the sun sets in the west and rises again in the east, the soul, too, dies and is reborn, not once, but countless times. Not only through lifetimes, but within one life. Each transformation, each ego death, each revelation is a passage through the Duat. So the true teaching of the Egyptians was not prepare for death, but die before you die. Let the illusions fall away. Let the false self dissolve. Enter the underworld consciously, now, so that when the time truly comes, you are not lost but guided, not judged but remembered. In a world that fears death, they embraced it. In a world that hides from the soul, they mapped it. And in a world that has forgotten the sacred, they engraved it in stone. What they left behind was not just a theology, it was a psychology of the eternal. A mystical science that reminds us, the afterlife is not a place we go, but a truth we uncover. And when we do, we realize we were never just living. We were always remembering. It's tempting to view all this, souls, underworlds, sacred scales, as distant mythology, the product of a civilization long gone. But the ancients never intended these teachings to remain buried beneath stone or reserved for the afterlife alone. The true purpose of their wisdom was to awaken the living. For the Egyptians, every day was a rehearsal for death, not in a morbid sense, but in a deeply empowering one. To live consciously meant to die consciously. To die consciously meant to ascend. So how do we apply any of this in a world consumed by noise, where the sacred has been drowned beneath algorithms, urgency, and ego. We begin by understanding that the Duat is not elsewhere. It is within. It's the landscape we traverse each time we close our eyes in meditation, each time we face a deep fear, each time we confront the shadow parts of ourselves we pretend don't exist. The gates, the trials, the beings, they are metaphors for inner transformation. To walk the path of Ma'at today means to live in alignment, not perfection, but presence. It means speaking with truth when silence tempts us. It means acting with integrity when no one is watching. It means daring to ask, what is my heart becoming? A simple daily practice to embody this wisdom is what the priests of Egypt once taught, a form of inner weighing. At the end of each day, before sleep, lie still and reflect. Did I speak truth today? Did I cause unnecessary harm? Did I feed the illusions of ego or nourish the essence of soul? This nightly reflection is a ritual of purification, not to judge, but to gently cleanse, to remove the psychic dust that accumulates through unconscious living. Breathwork was another practice, intentional, rhythmic breathing to awaken the Ka, the life force, and bring balance to the body and mind. The Egyptians saw breath as divine rhythm. Every inhale a spark of life, every exhale a release of the unnecessary. Name work, too, was sacred. The run, the true name, was believed to be a key to spiritual identity. To remember who you are beyond labels, beyond masks, beyond your history, is one of the most powerful things you can do. In modern terms, this might look like journaling with honesty, uncovering your core essence, calling yourself back from the personas you've built. Symbols were also used as tools, not decorations. The ankh wasn't just a charm, it was the key of life, a reminder that death was merely a gateway. Place an ankh where you meditate, draw it mindfully, use it as a visual mantra. I am eternal. I am in transformation. And finally, stillness. The ancient temples were designed to still the mind, to induce a state of sacred silence where the soul could speak. In a world addicted to speed and stimulation, creating a daily moment of stillness, even 5 minutes of intentional silence, can be revolutionary. Because in that silence, we meet ourselves. And when we meet ourselves truly and wholly, we begin to remember. The purpose of life, according to Egyptian spirituality, was not to escape death, but to prepare the soul so thoroughly, so consciously, that death becomes not an interruption, but a continuation, a flowering. By living with this awareness, our choices gain gravity, our relationships gain depth, our suffering gains context. We begin to live as initiates, not merely as mortals counting days, but as souls sculpting eternity. This is the lost teaching. The afterlife begins the moment we choose to awaken, the moment we choose to become transparent to our own soul. And when we do, we are no longer afraid of death, because we realize we were never just bodies wandering earth, waiting for heaven. We are fragments of divinity walking home. So much of what the ancient Egyptians knew has been buried, under sand, under translation, under centuries of forgetfulness. But their wisdom was never meant to be entombed. It was meant to be lived. Their vision of the afterlife was not a doctrine, it was a mirror held up to the soul, asking the only question that truly matters: are you awake? We often think of death as a wall, a sudden ending. But to the Egyptians, it was a door, a passage, one that could be prepared for, rehearsed, and ultimately mastered. They taught that this mastery wasn't reserved for priests or pharaohs. It was for anyone willing to live with clarity, with courage, and with sacred awareness. Their monuments still stand not just as echoes of power, but as instructions in stone. The hieroglyphs, the temples, the rituals, all point to an unchanging truth, that the soul is eternal, and that we are here not to merely survive, but to transform. To align with Ma'at is to bring harmony to a chaotic world. To weigh the heart daily is to remain intimate with your own evolution. To live with death in mind is not morbid, it is liberating. It strips away the noise. It reveals what is essential. It reminds you that your time here is not random. It is a sacred initiation. The afterlife, as the Egyptians knew it, is not a distant destination. It is a reflection of how deeply you have come to know yourself. how sincerely you have lived in truth, and how courageously you have let go of what you are not. So ask yourself, not someday, not later, but now, if your heart were weighed tonight, would it be light? This is the secret the ancients left behind, not to scare us, but to awaken us. Because the afterlife is not about where we go when we die. It's about who we become before we do. And maybe, just maybe, remembering this is how we begin to live for the very first time. If this stirred something deep within you, don't let it pass. Reflect on it. Share it. And if you feel called, join us as we continue exploring the ancient truths that still pulse beneath the surface of our modern world. Until next time, stay awake, stay aligned, and remember, the journey never ends.